Vic, I want to ask you first about the weekend. It was so astonishing beginning after I signed off on Friday. Israel took out Nasrallah and a dozen other people, including an IRGC general. Then they took out more terrorists in Beirut. Then they took out the Houthis. Now they've got special forces on the ground in Lebanon. What do you assess Israel as doing right now?
Well, actually, Hugh, I was thinking about this. It's really Michael Corleone levels of, brilliance and tactics going on here on the part of Netanyahu and that coalition government. They're taking care of business. They're tired of the status quo and just, certainly just defending or depending on the West's approach, which is de-escalation and not continuing the cycle of violence by retaliating. And that's what the Biden Harris administration wants them to do. And they're saying enough is enough. We have to move all of our Israelis who have been homeless for now going on for a year. We got to bring them back. And there's only one way to fix this. But Hugh, I have to say, the lead up to this whole operation was really quite brilliant because they made the Israelis made Nasrallah and Hezbollah believe that their phones were being tapped, which of course they were, and by quote unquote accidentally letting them know that, they then had to switch over to the pagers, and of course they had already created a front company to sell them the pagers, and then once they did that, they moved on from the pagers to the walkie-talkies. So Hezbollah had no other choice but to meet in person, and that's when they struck. The whole thing was planned.
Yeah, yeah,
It
Vic.
played out beautifully.
I'm finishing a Fox News column, which will run tomorrow. Correlation is not causation. I understand. I always teach that. But
Mhm.
we do know that Prime Minister Netanyahu came to a joint session of Congress on July 24th that the vice president, maybe the future president, skipped. They had a private meeting, and then he went back. And in the 2 months between then, July to August, August to September, and his return to the General Assembly, all this stuff, Hania getting killed in Tehran, Dieff getting announced dead, moving into Rafah, all the stuff in Lebanon, culminating in Nasrallah, and now ground operation, happened after that. Do you think there is a cause and effect there?
Yeah, yeah. I think the cause was that he was not encouraged that Biden and Harris were going to back him up, and in fact, I had read that they were discouraging him, in previous attempts to go after right after October 7th to go after Nasrallah. So I think he was like, "This, we've had enough. We're, Israel is in it at least for now until January. At least we're in it alone, and we have what it takes." I mean, maybe the U.S. is still very secretly providing it information, but they seem very upset. The State Department, our State Department certainly does, and says that they had, no, advanced information about any of this operation. And again, a State Department spokesman was quoted as saying that they knew no example historically where escalation leads to de-escalation. That's pretty discouraging if you're Israel.
Yeah, it's also, I cannot imagine what Vice President Harris told him, but I believe she will
Yeah.
be the most anti Israel president we have had since the founding of the refounding of the Jewish state in 1948. So I think they're just doing what they can do before every lever of American power is turned against them. I also think they've concluded Joe Biden's not really running anything, probably doesn't remember where Israel is. Vic, now I
Yeah.
want to ask you about Eric Adams because you are a quasi New Yorker, right?
Yeah. Sure. I
You're a
was born there.
quasi New Yorker. Can everyone be bought? I know the old joke. A recession has hit New Jersey when they begin to lay off the judges. But I really didn't think that you could get a mayor of New York for upgrades in first class.
Okay, first of all, let me just say this in defense of Eric Adams. Who doesn't love the upgrade? Because once you
I
move
know.
up to that, next you can't go back in the cattle car. That's impossible for somebody like the mayor of New York. That's unacceptable. What's really odd about that is him wanting to, accepting these, these bribes, these alleged bribes, we should say, and it's always having a stopover in Istanbul. Like you want to go over to China, you got to stop in Istanbul. You want to go here, you got to stop in Istanbul. It's even as lovely as planes are, you can go in the United's Polaris section. It's not comfortable. Yeah, it's pretty shocking, Hugh, because you think that he's the first sitting mayor to be indicted, and as I mentioned, on getting hammered. Not even Jimmy Walker the famous
Right.
corrupt mayor of New York, who was accepting what he called, munificences, right? Beneficences, I should say. They were municipal bribes,
As
and
Plunkett of
not
Tammany
even
Hall
he
said,
would.
there's a
Yeah,
difference between honest graft and dishonest graft. And honest
right,
graft is if some piece of information comes your way that they're going to build a new road, you might want to buy some land there. Dishonest
right,
graft
right.
is what Eric Adams did. But Vic, no one, I listened to Getting Hammered. I listened to the editors. I haven't heard the commentary podcast yet. To me, the most important part of this story is that our NATO ally, using air quotes,
Oh,
Turkey,
yeah.
is in the business of bribing American officials. So do we think Eric Adams is the only one? And do we trust Turkey with anything?
No, that's a great question. And it's funny because I think obviously that's how they're doing business because this had to do with a building codes and fire inspection. And the mayor was gettable for that, which is really, well, I mean, that's a depressing state of things to be in. And that's true. It always sort of confused me that Turkey is a NATO ally. And at the same time, their relations with Israel are not, our relations with Israel, or for example that they're still occupying the northern section of Cyprus, and so you have Greece, which is a NATO ally, and then you know it's very complicated and it's muddled, and
I
well, we'll
just
see what
think
happens.
they ought to
Yeah.
consider expelling NATO or getting rid of our Air Force base in Turkey because these are not our friends. Erdogan is not our friend. Now, Vic, I want to turn to tomorrow night. We have a big vice presidential debate. We're going to be
Yeah.
covering it on Salem, simulcasting it. It's going to be on the Salem News Channel both before and after, but the debate starts at 9 p.m. tomorrow night, goes for 90 minutes. Uh, I have my own prediction and my own advice. I think J.D. Vance should put wax in his ears, and when his light goes on, he should ignore everything Walz and Brennan and O'Donnell say or ask, and simply attack Kamala Harris. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, he shouldn't take the bait and he should stay on message. This will be interesting. I mean, look, obviously this is both of their first, time doing this kind of a debate at this level. Uh, Walls is a good talker, and he's got once again the moderators, on his side. So he'll have an easier time of it, and I can't imagine his questions are going to be anything but softballs. I could be wrong about it, and they're certainly not going to follow up. But we all know how people feel about JD. So I think that Senator Vance needs to certainly stay on message there and bring up the things that are most outrageous, especially if they get. I hope they talk about the border. Then he could talk about the 662,000 you know criminals that were let in by ICE's own numbers. And point these things out. He's very good though. I know he's smart. He's young. He's 39, but at the same time, he's a smart guy. I think he'll do fine. And again, at the end of the day, unless somebody does something horribly bad, I don't feel the vice presidential debates weigh in as much as we'd like them to sometimes.
I don't think they matter at all, which is why it's a messaging exercise for the vice presidential candidates. I guess Tim Walz is going to attack the former president continually. That would be his job. I think the vice president, I said, I'll get to your answer, question, Margaret, in just a second. But meanwhile, let me tell you that Vice President Harris went to the border for the second time this weekend, and she was wearing a $60,000 Tiffany necklace. Not exactly the right message to send to the people who are struggling to find a hotel room in New York or dealing with violence in Chicago. But they might interrupt him repeatedly. I really have no idea. CBS has nothing to lose by being rude to JD Vance, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, again, being on CBS, I think he should know what to expect. But unlike Walls, Vance and Trump, they take as many interviews and talk to the press as much as possible. We haven't seen much of Walls lately, and people say, "Well, no, he's just prepping for that debate." I think it's a little bit more than that, and I think it's the
He was
inability for
getting
them.
booed at the big house in
Yeah,
Ann Arbor on
yeah,
the weekend.
he was. Unlike Trump
I
in
know one
Alabama.
thing. I want your over under on the number of times Project 2025 is going to get brought up. Now, I want people to go to
Yeah.
25truth.com. Heritage Foundation is a sponsor of ours. They can go there and find out the truth about Project 2025, which has nothing to do with Trump Vance. But how many times do you think it's going to be brought up?
Maybe 10. What did you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I'll take the under on that. I'm guessing that it won't be much more than 6, but I'm still thinking it will be a relatively strong showing. I've just lost my earpiece, Vic, so I can't hear you. So I'm going to ask you an exit question. How do you feel about the election right now? I mean, what if it were held today? What do you think would happen?
Well, again, if you assume that the polls have not sufficiently corrected from 2020 in terms of their accuracy, and it's as close, Kamala Harris is nowhere near Joe Biden's lead at this point in time in the election, if I'm not mistaken, in 2020, which tells me that if Trump is behind by 2 points, 1 or 2 points, he might be ahead by one. So I think it would be a very close election result. Maybe Trump ekes it out, but I'm not going to hold my
Vic,
breath
a
for
quick
that.
question. I've been saying she's vacuous. Every interview she gives is
Yeah,
vacuous.
yeah,
I was attacked over the weekend by a person who shall not be named as being sexist for saying so. I think Tim Walz is vacuous. I think Matt Gaetz
no,
is vacuous. I think Bob Good is vacuous. I think Eric Adams is vacuous. Vacuous
yeah,
serves for everyone. Do you think that's a sexist term?
no, no. I also know men who are shrill, so I mean, I
Oh,
have
you
no
you
problems
bet.
using those
You
adjectives.
bet. Dwayne's very shrill. He's not here. I can say that. Vic Matus, follow him on X at Victorino Matus. Go and get Getting Hammered. Listen to the Getting Hammered podcast twice a week with Mary Catherine Ham and our guest, Vic Matus.